Yesterday, we dropped our reviews on the new Tata Harrier. Sirish, he gave you an in-depth review of Tata's new 5-seater SUV. And I'm going to give you a whole new, fresh review on the new Tata Safari. This is obviously based on the Harrier. It has up to 7 seats, but there is one big change, and that's really significant for this Safari facelift. It looks very different from the Tata Harrier. Welcome to Evo India and welcome to our first drive review of this facelifted Tata Safari. Before we dive into the review, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Evo India channel and leave a comment down below. Do you like the way this new Safari looks? I want to hear from you. So I did talk about the big differences between Harrier and Safari, and the biggest of them all has to be this grille. The Safari, it gets this parametric grille with body colored finishes on the grille. I do wish it was finished a little better. You can see a little bit of inconsistencies in the paint. Lower down, you get this brushed silver lip. On the Harrier, both the grille and the lip are all black, and that makes it look more youthful, whereas the Safari is going for a more grown-up executive vibe. There are a few similarities between the two, the most identifiable of them being this light bar. After the launch of the Nexon and the Nexon EV, I assumed that the light bar would be reserved for EV cars only in Tata Motors range, but that's not true. It's apparently reserved for high-end cars, and that's why both the ICE Safari and Harrier will be getting this. Other changes, you get new headlamps. The Safari gets Safari written here in a chrome strip. You've got an air vent over here to allow for better aerodynamics and cooling of the brakes. Now coming over to the side, you get this new wheel design on the Safari. These are 19s, again a first for the Safari, and you get it on its top end trim as well as the dark and adventure trims. This wheel design looks really cool. We saw it on the Sierra concept first, and now it's in production on the Safari. For the back, you've got a 360-degree camera on the wing mirror, you can see that. You've got Safari lettering on the sides over here, more chrome, so you've got chrome on the door handles, and further back you can tell that this section is different from the Harrier. Now this is carried over from before. This whole tail section, the roof is taken up a little higher and it's been extended a little bit to account for the extra row of seats. At the rear, tail section, that's completely revised. You get taillights that are new. It's a little different from the Harrier's taillights. You get the Safari badging at the back, and you've got that chrome, not chrome, but brushed silver at the bottom over there. So overall, the Safari looks a little more grown up compared to the Harrier. It looks a little different, and I think that's good for the Harrier and Safari. That differentiation is important between the two brands, and Tata Motors has executed it very cleanly. Now let's get into the interiors of the Tata Safari. Compared to yesterday's Harrier, it's very similar but a little bit different. Let's first talk about the steering wheel. This is an all-new leather-wrapped steering wheel. It actually feels really nice to hold. This leather wrapping, this twin-colored leather wrapping feels really nice. The stitching feels really nice. It feels like a nice steering wheel to hold. But there's familiarity to the Nexon. This center portion is very similar to what you get on the Nexon. Sure, this is a 4-spoke and the Nexon was a 2-spoke, but the controls are identical, as are the paddles. I would have liked to see a little more premium feeling section over here for how the buttons feel and click. It doesn't feel very solid, doesn't feel very well damped. It doesn't have any heft to it, the clicks of the buttons, and that I don't like too much. The backlit logo is interesting, it's novel, so I'm okay with that, but I feel like the buttons and the paddles could have been executed a little better. Behind over there is a 10.25-inch instrument cluster. Now this again is identical compared to what you get on the Nexon, and it has good usability. You have a lot of information on there. You've got your music, you can throw up maps, there's a ton of stuff in there. Over here, 12.3-inch touchscreen. Now this is what you get on the top end of the Nexon EV, and you get it here as well. In terms of functionality, again, packed with a load of stuff. So as you can see here, I've got CarPlay projected onto it, but I can go to the home button and there's a ton of stuff in the menus over here. So if I go in here, you can see there's Alexa, and I can actually connect to Alexa devices in my home if I have any. There's an AQI monitor and an air purifier working really well right now. You've got your climate control settings in here, but you've also got physical buttons down here, which I really appreciate. You've got JBL modes, and these are really interesting. You can set up the sound the way you like it. I was listening to wide stage and I really liked it because it made me feel like I was in a much bigger space than a car. There's a ton of stuff in here and you can set it up the way you like. Coming back to this, you've got your ADAS settings in here, which are useful obviously in Indian conditions. You've also got a 360-degree camera with a 3D mode, so you can actually see what the car looks like from all angles. Really interesting, and you can control it. Again, very neatly executed by Tata Motors. And you've got voice assistant and a bunch of other stuff in here. So you've got a lot of functionality packed into the screen, and going with Tata Motors push in a more techie direction, this sits really well with them. Now coming to the dashboard and the materials on the dashboard, this top layer, all soft touch, really nicely done. This looks like wood, but it's not wood. It's actually plastic. You've got this glossy black panel over here. Again, looks really nice, but a fingerprint magnet, especially around the AC controls. But down here, again, more soft touch and more premium feeling stuff. Coming lower down in the dashboard, you've got two USB ports. If you want to connect your phone via USB, you're still going to have to use a USB-A port, but you've got a 45-watt USB Type-C charger, which is really good. That's a fast charger, should top your phone up really quickly, and you've got wireless CarPlay, so you don't really need that Type-A port anymore. You've got a wireless phone charger down here, but it's a little hard to access. It's in a little bit of a recess over here. Drive mode selector, that continues, and it's a rotary dial with a screen, similar to what we had on the Nexon EV before. But I must say, here the visibility of the screen is a lot better in daylight. Around the screen, you've got your eco mode and your sport mode buttons. You've got this new gear selector over here, again in line with the Nexon, and your controls for the electronic parking brake. Another difference over here is the seats. The upholstery is different in the Tata Safari. The front seat over here has those Boss buttons, so you can control it from the rear seat. You've got cooled seats with the buttons on the side of the seat. You've got seats with a memory function. So this really does come packing in terms of equipment. Now coming to the back seat, the only real difference between the Harrier and the Safari is the fact that you get captain seats in the second row in the Safari, and they're really nice. They hold you well, they feel really comfortable, and this theatre style seating means you sit really high up and you can see above the driver onto the road ahead. It's a really commanding seating position in the second row. Stuff that I like, you get cooled seats in the second row. That's something you don't get on the Harrier. You get these blinds over here, that's neat, and these headrests. You know, you can squeeze them in like this, just like you can on an aircraft, and you get really nice support. So if you want to doze in the back seat, this is the place to be. Now, in terms of space, you've got good space over here. Headroom is good despite being seated so high up and there being a panoramic sunroof. That's part of the reason why the Safari has such a raised roof. And this is actually a really comfortable place to be. If you want to be chauffeur driven and you want to spend a lot of time in the second row, I would highly recommend you look at the Safari just for the captain seats. It is really a seal the deal kind of seat over here. Now getting into the third row, it's not that easy. You can move this forward and try to recline this and squeeze in here, but it's a narrow approach. I'm a thin guy and even this is a squeeze for me. So what's easier is to keep the chair back in its original position and get in from the center. So you get in from here and then back yourself into the third row. Now in the third row, in terms of space, it's just about adequate in terms of knee room as well as headroom. It's not somewhere where you want to spend a lot of time, but children will actually have more than enough space in here. Thigh support is compromised, space is a little cramped, so for adults, I'd say it's useful in a pinch, but for kids, you can actually throw them in here all the time. You've got USB ports in the back to keep them entertained. You've got a separate AC blower vent over here to keep it cool with your own AC controls at the back, and you've got some storage in the sides as well. It's a neat space and it does add to the usability cases of the Tata Safari. But this third row does affect boot space. So let's check out the boot before we get to the driving. Now coming to the boot, you can kick underneath the boot to open it. I don't have the keys on me right now, so it won't work. But you press a button here and the boot opens all on its own, which is really nice because the Safari boot was a handful to open. In terms of space, it's not too much. You've got a little bit of space over here. This is my backpack with my laptop. Fits over here. You can fit maybe 2-3 of these small backpacks in the back. If you want to fit a suitcase or even probably cabin luggage, you're going to have to drop the seats. So you pull on this lever, drop one seat, do the same on the other side, drop the other seat, and now you've got a reasonably large loading bay for your bags. If you want storage space in your Safari, you're going to have to give up your last row of seats. That's a compromise you're going to have to make. Now, let's get to the driving and see what's changed over there.
Pilot shot a Rockefeller hover. Down go to war like a soldier. Yeah. Plus they tried to count me out thinking that it's over. But I got to fight.
Okay, now first driving impressions of the new Safari. It really feels quite familiar because honestly not too much has changed. You've got the same engine, you've got the same chassis, you've got a few tweaks everywhere, obviously, but nothing radical has been changed. In terms of the engine, you've got the Cryotech 170, which is essentially the FCA-sourced 2-liter diesel engine. It makes 168 bhp, 350 Nm of torque. Those peak outputs remain absolutely the same, and you get the same 6-speed automatic, even though you get a new actuator for the automatic transmission. What does the engine feel like? Well, it's certainly punchy. You put it into sport mode.
Sport drive mode activated.
And then you've got a nice amount of punch. You've got really good forward movement when you get onto boost. And in terms of refinement, okay, it's a typical diesel engine. There's a clatter, there's a bit of vibrations, but it's not intrusive in the cabin. When you're cruising along 1500, 2000 RPM, it's not intrusive. It's only when you try to rev it out too far into the rev range, that's when you do feel a little bit of it into the cabin. But it really suits the character of the Safari. The Safari is this really big, bold, macho SUV, and the torquey nature of this engine, it really suits the Safari's character. You can hear the whistle of the turbo slightly, you can feel it come onto boost, and all of that is a really enjoyable thing when you're trying to hustle the Safari. When you're bombing down the highway, it all works together really nicely. Now, the gearbox, nothing has changed there. It's still a 6-speed automatic, but you do get paddle shifters. Now, a couple of criticisms about the paddle shifters. I have no complaints about paddle shifters per se. I think they're really useful. They really suck you into the driving experience, into an automatic. But on this particular car, a couple of issues. One, the left paddle clicks differently from right paddle. The left paddle is really soft, the right paddle is really firm. So the right paddle gives you a firm click, whereas the left one doesn't, and it just feels inconsistent, left paddle to right paddle. Secondly, if you're in the regular city drive mode or any of the other modes and you click a paddle, to say for example the left paddle,
Sport drive mode activated.
it automatically activates sport mode. So you don't have the choice of driving the car with paddles in any mode except sport mode, which just makes no sense to me. Like, if I want to drive in city drive mode and I want a downshift, I can't do that. I have to get into sport mode and ask for a downshift. It automatically shifts, but I am then getting more power, less fuel economy, all of those things. So it just makes no sense to me. Why can't I have city drive mode and a downshift? This beats me. And lastly,
City drive mode activated.
there, it just goes back into city mode on its own. And lastly, it doesn't give you downshifts all the time. So if you're at 2000 RPM or so and you ask for a downshift, it just refuses. It just says shift can't happen, you know. And to me that seems strange. You can downshift at 2000 RPM. There's enough revs in the rev range to accept that downshift. Sure, you'll be high up in the revs and maybe out of the power band, but if you ask for a downshift and it's not gonna over rev and cross the red line, I don't see why that's a problem. But the Tata Safari won't allow it. Now that aside, let's talk about ride quality and handling, and those are two real strengths of the Safari. First of all, ride quality. I honestly thought they'd ruin the ride putting these 19s on the Safari. These are big wheels, but they haven't. The Safari still rides really well. It has always been its strength, and that continues. It's on really sharp bumps that you can feel a slight thud inside the cabin. But over general roads, even over smaller bumps and ditches, you don't notice that you're using bigger wheels. And that's a really good thing, because you get the great stance, you get the better handling, but you don't compromise too much on the ride quality. On flat roads like these, on open highways, you feel really planted, really stable. You can carry really high speeds without really bothering the car, without noticing it. And that's a really good sign. Sometimes at high speeds, 130, 140, not that you should be doing these speeds on our roads, the Safari feels really planted, it feels really stable, and it disguises the speeds that it's doing really well. So there are times where you don't realize how fast you're going, and that can be a bad thing because you're really going fast sometimes without noticing it. But it feels confident and it feels composed, and nothing really rattles it. Even if there are bad patches of road suddenly that appear out of nowhere and you're traveling at speed, it doesn't get rattled, it just hammers over them without any questions asked. Now coming to the handling, and I think this is where the biggest improvement in terms of its driving has been, and that's because the Safari now gets EPS, electric power steering. Previously the Safari got hydraulic power steering and it was a little bit all over the place. The initial turn-in was too sharp, there used to be a lot of torque steer, there used to be a lot of juddering at the wheel. It used to handle well and it used to feel confident and used to be able to place the car well, but the steering always felt a little off, and that has been changed. Now the steering, it feels really nicely dialed in. You have a good amount of control. Now the Safari steering feels spot on. The weight is spot on. The turn-in off center feels spot on. It doesn't turn in too quickly like before. It's quick, but it's not overly quick to the point of it being unnerving on the highway. It feels really nice. It has got good weight, good... Okay, it may not have too much by way of feel. Obviously, the electric power steering robs you some of that feedback, the clarity, the texture that hydraulic feedback used to give you. But in terms of how it feels to drive, I think this is a lot better. Even in terms of how it feels in the city, the slickness, the ease of use, the weight, all of that is better judged. And out here on the highway, when you've got nice winding roads, even if you're on narrower roads, you feel really confident placing the Safari because of how direct and how correct the steering now feels. Combine that steering with the larger wheels, with the well-sorted suspension, with the good balance of ride and handling that it has, and you've got an SUV that's actually legit fun to drive. I know this is a big car, it's even bigger than the Harrier, but you can still have fun behind the wheel of this car. You find a good driving road and you can actually have a good time. You've got plenty of torque on offer, you've got a nice balanced chassis, you've got good steering. I'm smiling. I really am smiling. Now, the biggest rival to the Safari is obviously the XUV700, and in terms of how it compares to that XUV, I'd say it's really, really close. In terms of steering weight, it's a lot better. In terms of ride quality, maybe the XUV rides and handles a little better. A lot of that thanks to its independent rear suspension. But the Safari, it is a serious step up from the last one, and a lot of that, I must tell you, is down to this steering. Other stuff you need to know about the Safari, it gets a whole suite of ADAS features. You can access them from the menu. Forward collision warning, you've got adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, you've got stop and go in traffic with the adaptive cruise control, you've got a blind spot monitor. So in terms of ADAS features, this is very well kitted out. In terms of the way it looks, in terms of the way it feels special, it feels expensive, it feels upmarket. I do wish Tata had paid a little bit more attention to the tactile points around here. It's unforgivable that the two paddles feel different from each other, you know. That's just not on. And I can't wrap my head around how these paddles work with the sport and the city mode. So I'm just going to ignore that for now. But that aside, this is a really nice car. You've got your drive modes. You can put it into wet mode and
Wet mode is activated.
dial down the power, dial up the ESP intervention. You can put into rough roads.
Rough road mode is activated.
And that again changes the way the car behaves in terms of torque delivery and ESP and even how it holds gears. But
Wet mode is City drive
You may want to
mode
just keep it in
activated.
city or in sport. Turn off these voice commands for crying out loud and just enjoy your Safari. It is a nice car to drive, and it is a nice car that I'm sure you can have road trips in. You can pack your family into, create good memories, have fun in. That's what cars like these are all about. They're all about getting out there and exploring, and the Safari, it motivates you to do that. It feels like a car that wants you, that urges you to drive it and drive it hard, and that's what I like in a car. You want to buy a car that every time you get into, you feel nice about driving, and the Safari does do that. Once you're on the mood, once you're driving it, once you're using that torque, feeling how it feels, it really feels enjoyable and nice to drive. So what's the verdict on the Safari? I really love this thing. I've always loved the Safari. It's always been a car that has tugged at my heartstrings a little bit. That's always been enjoyable to drive. And the updates here make it that much better. The steering, I think, is the biggest of them all and really elevates the driving experience. It feels more refined, more crisp. The interiors make the Safari so much more livable. That updated infotainment screen makes it feel modern and contemporary. And the styling, I think the updates are properly spot on. It has presence, it looks cool, it looks different, it looks spot on in my opinion. This thing is really fun to drive, and compared to yesterday's Harrier, it feels slightly better built as well. We don't know the prices yet, but knowing Tata Motors, I don't expect it to be too much more expensive than before. We saw what they did with the Nexon, really aggressive pricing there. And I think they're going to carry that over with the Safari as well. So prices should start around 15.5, 16 lakhs ex-showroom and go all the way up to 25 lakhs for stuff like the top of the line dark edition and all of that. But even at that price, this Safari is really good value. It hits the nail on the head in terms of delivering a true blue SUV experience without the 4x4 obviously, but it feels really competent and really fun to drive.